All right, good morning, church. Good to see you all here this morning. Glad that you're here. Hopefully you've had a good weekend, and I know we've got some visitors. I'm thankful to see all of you here. I hope we get a chance to meet you afterwards, and I hope you can stick around for us to do that. Okay, what's the longest you have ever had to wait on somebody else? You almost were waiting on me because I just looked down at the bulletin and realized I was going before the Lord's Supper this morning, so you would have waited on me a little bit, but I just saw. So what's the longest you've ever waited on somebody? Maybe you've waited for somebody at a restaurant, you're supposed to meet someone there, hopefully it wasn't first date or blind date. Maybe you're waiting for somebody and time passes and they just don't show up. Maybe you're picking somebody up at the airport. Maybe you're meeting someone for work purposes. Maybe it's somebody you've never met, but you know you're supposed to meet them at this place and this time, and they're just not there, and you keep waiting, and you keep waiting. Maybe you've seen this image. Hopefully this hasn't happened to you. Have you ever stood up on a date before? You're sitting there waiting, and that person doesn't show, and you keep looking and you go, oh, maybe they just hit traffic. And then more time passes, and then you have to figure out, okay, I'm either going to have to keep this meal alone, or I have to awkwardly exit the restaurant without people knowing that I've been stood up, right? So what's the longest you've ever had to wait? You've probably been familiar with this image. I didn't even pick one that had people in it. You could look at it and know what this is. Doctor's waiting room, right? We've all been in that position. Last time I went to the doctor, it took probably an hour and a half, and all I needed was a referral. I'm just thinking, I just need you to sign this, and I have to wait and wait and wait. And what's your threshold for waiting? What's your patience level? What becomes too much? Can you wait for someone for 15 minutes? Can you wait for somebody for 30 minutes? At what point you get that delicate line there where you go, okay, I'm either going to cut bait and say, I'm done, I got to keep going, I got other things to do. Or are you the type of person that says, well, if I leave now, they're probably going to show up in the next minute or so and I'll miss them, so I'll just stay here. How long is too much to wait? Are you good? We're going to be looking at this parable here in Matthew chapter 25. If you want to turn over there, we'll look at that starting in verse 1 here in just a minute. I want us to think about this idea. We're talking about preparation. We're talking about waiting. We're talking about patience. And so here's the thing that I want us to think about as we go through the lesson this morning. You and I, we know this, we've maybe heard it in different ways, but I want us to think about this idea that heaven is a prepared place for prepared people. People that don't get ready, people that don't make their preparations, they're not going to be the ones in heaven. It's going to be the people who do the things that they need to do, and they are ready, and they're waiting. They're ready for Christ to return. And so heaven is a prepared place for prepared people. Before we get into this parable in Matthew chapter 25, I want to backtrack to the very tail end of Matthew chapter 24 because it prefaces this parable that we're going to read. It's the same subject matter. So in Matthew chapter 24, he'll say a couple different times, Jesus is speaking, and he says, therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that even the Son himself, Jesus, does not know when the return will take place. And so he's passing this on to his followers, and he says, be on the alert, be ready. You don't know when the Lord is coming. And he'll say it again in verse 44. He'll say the same thing. He will say, for this reason you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not think he will. And so he has these two statements here, and he's giving them right before he goes into this parable in Matthew chapter 25. All right, John, we've reached that point. We've been having all kinds of issues with our projector, our slides, and everything else, so hopefully we'll get this worked out. So Matthew chapter 25, we're going to start here in verse 1. If you want to follow along, Matthew 25 in verse 1. It says, then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were prudent. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. Now while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight there was a shout, "Behold, the bridegroom! Come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. The foolish said to the prudent, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the prudent answered, "No, there will not be enough for us and you too. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourselves." And while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. Later the other virgins also came, saying, "Lord, Lord, open up for us." And he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour." So we have this story, this parable that Jesus tells, and we have 10 virgins or 10 bridesmaids. 5 of them are prudent, 5 of them are foolish. And we need to understand that weddings were a little bit different back then than what they are today. Back then, sometimes you would have an engagement that was arranged by the parents. How would you like that? And so the parents arrange the engagement, and then you have this time where they are given, this man and woman who are entered marriage, they're given this time where they can consider and figure out, okay, is this going to be a good match? Is this going to be a good thing for us? And so they actually have a little bit of time there to kind of back out if they want to. And if everything is agreed upon, then they would have this transaction, everything would take place. And then we see this event that takes place in this parable of Matthew 25, that the bridegroom shows up to receive the bride, and with the bridesmaid, the attendants, what he calls these 10 virgins in the parable, they would go to this wedding and to the feast. I don't know if you caught this, but why did the 5 foolish not have oil? Did they run out of oil? Is that what the text says? It never actually tells us that they brought oil and just burned it too fast or too quickly and they ran out. It doesn't say that in the text. It just says that they asked the prudent ones for some oil because they are in need of some. And so it could be that these 5 foolish virgins, they never had oil to begin with. That perhaps they were not prepared the way that they should have been. Do you know anybody who always waits to the last minute to do something? Right? Maybe when you were in school, you had this term paper, and you got it on your syllabus the first day of class, and you knew that you were going to have to write this term paper. And so all semester, you knew, okay, I'm going to have to write this term paper, I need to get it done. And the semester goes on, and you wait till the night before the class is going to end, and you go, okay, I guess I got to write that term paper. Anybody know anybody like that? Maybe it's you. Maybe you're married to somebody like that. All right? You wait till the last minute and just expect it to all work out later on. These 5 foolish bridesmaids, these virgins, they ask, well, hey, we don't have any oil. We need some for you. We need some for ourselves. Okay, can we take some of your oil? And they said, no, because if we give you some, we don't have enough. Right? Basically, it's not our fault that you didn't come prepared. And so they are without oil. They're trying to get it from somebody else. I want us to think about this idea real quickly before we move on. Sometimes we take pride in the fact that we come from a good family, or we come from a good background, or we have other people in our family that have been members of the church, or this is what we were raised with. When it comes to Judgment Day, those people can't do anything for you. That's great that you have a wonderful spouse. That's wonderful that you have a good family, that you had good mentors in your life that helped raise you and bring you up. But when judgment comes, everyone has to speak and answer for themselves. I want to show you a couple different verses going along with this idea. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 27. The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. You can't be, I know there's some religions that think, well, you can kind of get brownie points from somebody else. If you've lived a better life than me, then maybe you can give me some of your good fortune or your good merit, and that'll help me get in. That's not the way that we see it in Scripture. And just like these versions, you can't just borrow oil and say, hey, I just really need this and I just need to get in. Let me borrow some of yours. No. You're on your own. Okay? Here's another one. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. You must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ so that each one may receive what is due for his deeds in the body, according to what he has done, whether good or bad. And so you have to answer for yourself. And so what does that mean? It means we have to be prepared. That heaven is a prepared place for people who are prepared, who make sure that they are ready to meet Christ. I want us to think about this idea because whenever we talk about Christ's return, I don't think that we think about it in the same way that the people in the first century church would have thought about it. I think the people in the first century church, when we read through Acts and we read through all these letters that Paul and Peter and John, all these guys are writing, I think they have a different level of urgency and expectancy that maybe we don't have. They live every day thinking Jesus is coming back today. And why did they think that? Because he didn't come back yesterday. So it has to be today. They kept thinking, he's coming soon. Every day they expected. When he ascended into heaven at the beginning of the book of Acts, and we go through the stories in Acts, each day that passes, they're thinking, okay, we're in the end times. He's coming. Get ready. They expected it to happen a lot sooner than what it did. And so I don't think that we have that same type of urgency. I don't know, maybe you do. But I would say, by and large, we as a church, we don't live that way, do we? We think it's going to happen someday. Maybe in the distant future, but we don't really think that it's going to happen today, do we? Do we think it's going to happen today or tomorrow? Do we live with that type of urgency? I want to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about here with this urgency that they had in the church. All throughout these letters and even the book of Acts, you have phrases where all the writers say, we are in these last days. We're in the last times. They're talking about the final days. They believe this is going to happen very, very soon. They would talk about the days of the prophets. They would talk about the days of the people coming out of Exodus. And they said, well, now we are in the last days. And they weren't writing that for our benefit. They were writing that for the benefit of the first century readers, the original readers. They're saying, get ready. We're in the last days. Over and over and over again, they all use this terminology. Even Peter in his sermons will use this. He talks about, we're in the last days. There's also indications, Paul writes and talks about how the coming of Christ, the second coming of Christ is going to happen. And there's people that were worried. And they said, well, hang on, what if I die and Christ comes back? How's that going to work out? And Paul says, okay, I can answer that. It's pretty simple. Those that have died are going to be raised from the grave, and all of us who are alive will meet them to join the Lord in the air. And so he explains the process. This is how it's going to go. And he will say, but not all of you will sleep. And again, he's not writing that. Paul probably had no inkling that anything that he wrote was going to be read by millions of people centuries later. He's writing that for their benefit. He's saying, some of you who are reading this letter may not sleep. In other words, in your lifetime, in my lifetime, as Paul's writing this, Jesus is going to come back. That's what we expect. And so some of you may not even sleep at all before he returns. There's also an example, the church in Thessalonica, they write to Paul. He talks about the coming of Christ and what that's going to look like. And then he has to write them back. We know it as 2 Thessalonians. And in chapter 2, he has to kind of ease their worries a little bit because they thought that it was coming so soon, and they're all standing around. Some of them are quitting their jobs. Okay, they're being idle because they just think it's going to happen anytime. And because Paul has impressed upon them this idea that it's going to happen very soon, and it hasn't, they go, wait a minute, maybe we missed it. Maybe he already showed up and we just weren't paying attention. And so Paul has to write them, and in chapter 2 of 2 Thessalonians, he tells them what it's going to look like. And he says, don't worry, he hasn't come yet, but he's going to. So stay alert. Stay aware. And of course, all of this instruction, Paul is telling them that he expects them to live a certain way, to be ready. So in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 2, you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. He's talking about being prepared. You brethren are not in darkness that the day would overtake you like a thief. You all are sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. And so if you know that Jesus is coming back, if you know that He's going to return, that should cause you to live a certain way. It should cause you to get prepared, to be ready for Him coming back. I want to give you one final one here, because I think when we talk about this urgency that Paul and others had, again, I don't know that we have that type of urgency. I don't know if we have that type of expectancy that they had. But what would that look like if we did? What would it look like if we woke up every morning, not just thinking He might come back today, but just telling ourselves, He's coming back today. And then at the end of the day, if He doesn't, that's okay, but at least I placed that in my mindset. Today is the day. How would you live your life? Would you live any differently if you woke up every day saying, Jesus is coming back today? Would you be a little kinder to people? Would you show people a little bit more grace? Would you be more willing to forgive somebody of the past wrong? Would you be encouraged to pick up the phone and call that friend or family member that you haven't talked to in years? Would you live a little bit differently if you knew that Jesus Christ was coming back? Or at least expected Him to? And if Paul expected Christ to come back, for many of his readers in their lifetimes, if he expected it then, and had that urgency then, and Christ hasn't returned yet, then what does that say about our level of urgency and expectancy? So Paul will say in Romans chapter 13, do this knowing the time, that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. For now salvation is nearer to us than when we believe. The night is almost gone, the day is near. Therefore let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. I don't know if you thought about it in this way. He says there, salvation is nearer to us than when we first believed. If you think about it, every single day that you live puts you one day closer to being in heaven. I don't know about you, that's good news. That's exciting. Because despite everything that's going on in our world right now and how messed up it is, every day that you and I can just tough it out and make it through one more day, we say, you know what? One day closer. I'm one day closer. And so we should live with this urgency and this expectancy. I started thinking about people who are trained, people that are by nature prepared and ready at all times. And so I thought of this image of firefighters. How firemen are trained and equipped to fight fires. It's what they do. They know that there's going to be fires. I don't know any firemen that go their whole careers without fighting a fire. They know there's going to be fires. They know they're going to happen. They just don't know when those fires are going to occur. They might put out a fire that night. They may not put out a fire for a week or a month. Or they might have 2 or 3 in one day. So they know the fires are going to happen. They just don't know when they're going to happen. So they're always prepared. They're ready. You could talk about how, they have the polls. I don't know if they still do the polls or not, but they have everything to where they can make sure that they're maximizing all of their time, because seconds count in those moments. And so they have the poles, they slide down the poles, they have everything ready to go, right? You've seen those images where their helmets laid aside, they have their boots and their pants already attached, they're ready to go. They just got to step into those things and pull them up, and they're ready. They're prepared. They don't know when the call is going to come, they don't know when it's going to happen, but they know by the nature of their job, they are going to fight fires. And so they prepare for that. So when that call comes, they're ready. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it's the same thing when we talk about Christ's return. It's not a matter of, is Christ going to come back? It's a matter of when. And you and I, knowing that He is coming back, how then should we live? How prepared should we be? Should we wait to the very last minute and just try to bum some oil off the person next to us, hoping that's going to help? Or should we make our own preparations and make sure that we're ready when He shows up? We don't know when it's going to be. The Son doesn't even know when it's going to be. Jesus doesn't even know. So are we ready when that happens? I want us to think about a couple things here while we close. First one, very obvious. Are you prepared to meet Christ right now? I'm talking about this urgency, this expectancy. If Jesus were to show up when you guys are eating lunch at Casa Grande or JR's or whatever, would you be ready? Or are there some things that you go, you know what? I need to fix this over here. And I've been meaning to go talk to this person. And I've been meaning to share the gospel with my neighbor. There's certain things that I've left unfinished, and I need to get those taken care of. Would your life be different if you lived with urgency and expectancy? Have you made preparations for Christ to return? And again, this same idea, what if we just live with this urgency and expectancy the first century church had? I mean, they're thinking it's going to be any day now. And we have the benefit of looking back now in retrospect at this 2020 vision. We hate to use that term 2020, I think, this year. But 2020 vision, if we look back and say, okay, Paul, the apostles, all of these guys had this urgency. They woke up with the expectancy. Jesus is coming back today. It didn't happen. And thousands of years have passed. And so what does that say for us? Is He not nearer now than He was back then? And are you not nearer to heaven today than you were yesterday? And so we need to make sure that we are prepared to meet Christ. We need to make sure that we are living with this urgency and this expectation that when Christ returns, we will be people that have our lamps ready, that our lights will be burning, and we'll be ready to meet Christ. Let's make sure that we are living with that urgency this week. Let's pray together, please. Father, we thank You for this time. We thank You for an opportunity to get together, to be with other brothers and sisters. We thank You for the love and the encouragement and the support that we all receive from being together and fellowshipping together. Father, we understand that Jesus is coming back one day. And we know that this is good news, but for many people, Father, it can also be terrifying news if they are not ready and if they have not made preparations. Father, help us to be the people who live with expectancy, who live with urgency, who know that Christ could return at any moment. And so help us to live like people who live in the light and not in the darkness. Help us to represent You the best way that we can in this world. And help us to follow the path that You've laid out in front of us. Father, as we focus on Your goodness and we remember the sacrifice of Christ here in just a few moments, Father, help us to think about how that sacrifice calls us to sacrifice our own selves. That You have done all of these things for us through Your Son. And all You have asked of us is to live for You, to live for the one who has died for us. And so, Father, help us to live with urgency this week. Help us to reach out to those around us and help us to be good examples to all we come into contact with. Again, we thank you for Jesus, and it's through his name that we pray. Amen.